Why are we alone? In an almost unlimited world filled with so much variety, we, the players, are the only humans remaining. Why is that? What happened to everyone else? And are we doomed to the same fate? Well, let's find out. Our story begins not all that long ago, back during the peak of the Illager Empire. Now, back then, the Illagers were ruthless beings, more so than even today, as they, for the first time ever, back then, had just discovered dark magic. And with that, they became very, very powerful. And so they used their dark magic powers a lot more than realistically they should have been, as they were yet to discover the consequences of using these evil powers. But that's not all that important at the moment, as the Illagers were in the midst of attacking their villagers in every way that they could, as they would attack them by summoning giant black clouds of pure destruction that would consume the villages and all the villagers within. They were also resurrecting the souls of corrupted beings and turning them into evil servants that would be commanded to attack the villagers. They'd even found a way through their dark magic to fuse their own dark, twisted souls with that of a horse, and thus they were able to create the ultimate killing machine, otherwise known as the Ravager. And so it would be rather fair to say that things were going very well for the Illagers, as they were dominating control over the entire overworld. And the villagers, their opposition, well, they almost didn't have a chance of long-term survival. But despite their grand successes, well, it just wasn't enough for the Illagers, as they didn't want the villagers to even have a slight chance of survival. They wanted them extinct. And so with that, they began to create a monster so evil that the world would never be the same. A robotic monster, more specifically, that would change the fate of the villagers, as this monster was going to have the implanted knowledge of all of the Illagers, knowing exactly how to cast every single dark magic spell, and would know how to craft every single tool of the Illagers. It was also going to have 10 regenerative hearts forged from that of the Totem of Undying. It was also going to have almost unlimited strength, and was going to be able to work non-stop for all of eternity. This monster was going to be a nightmare for all of the villagers. That's right, that monster was none other than the Steve. And so once he was created, he was sent out all across the world with only one command:
kill all villagers, they are our enemies.
And so he would complete that mission, and he did so with great efficiency, as he was able to rip apart the houses of the villagers with his bare hands. And so there was nowhere to hide from him, as he would always be able to find the villagers. And so, realistically, there was nothing that the villagers could do to avoid the Steve. And thus, for that reason, in only that first day, he was able to kill a few 100,000 villagers. And so, after that successful trial of using the Steve just for one day, he was ordered to return back to the Illager mansion, which he did very quickly, as he could run very fast. And so, once he was back within that Illager mansion, the Illagers began to cast some more dark magic spells upon him, as they created clones of the Steve. Now, this took them a few hours to complete, but once they were done, they had tens of thousands of Steves, all of which were carbon copies of each other. It was glorious. Never had the Illagers had this much power. And so with that, they sent out all of these thieves with the exact same mission.
Kill all villagers. They are our enemies.
And so, that's exactly what they would do, spreading all across the overworld. And it only took a few days before in every jungle, there was a Steve. In every desert, there was a Steve. In every tundra, there was a Steve. They were everywhere, and they were killing every single villager that they could find. And thus, the villagers were getting very close to extinction. Meanwhile, back in the mansions, the Illagers were beginning to celebrate, as they were about to win this millennia-long war, and were just so excited about their victory, as they were very soon going to be the rulers of the world. Well, that's what they thought, until on one spring morning, when everything changed. As it was on that bright morning that one of the Steve monsters, whilst running through a dark oak forest, saw something that just broke him, as he saw two young evokers right by a lake. But that's not all. They were playing peacefully with two young villagers. That's not right. They were meant to be enemies. They were meant to be hating each other. And so this monstrous Steve was just confused. And so he decided to slow down and crouch to see exactly what those evil villagers were doing, as surely he must have been mistaken with what he was seeing. But as he hid there in that bush, he saw that both the villagers and the Illagers continued to play nicely together. No, this was wrong. All wrong. Those young villagers were clearly trying to just lure these young evokers into a false sense of security and were then going to kill them. And so, thinking that, this Steve lunged forward, blocking the villagers from the Illagers, and he was getting ready to kill them, when those young evokers pushed him out of their way and continued to play. No, that wasn't right. Why are they like this? This is all wrong. He was just broken inside, both metaphorically and literally, as his coat broke from within when he saw this. And so it was then that he became suddenly aware that the villagers were not the enemies, that they were actually peaceful creatures. And he was also aware that the Illagers were the evil ones, as they were going into the homes of the villagers and ruthlessly killing them. He was aware of the damage he had caused, and so it was at that moment that he became a sentient being. And so, from that moment onwards, he also turned his back on the Illagers, as he decided to now devote his life to protect the villagers. But he was not the only one who had this sudden moment of character development, as all the other Steves were connected with one another, and so all of them became sentient at that moment as well. And they all realized too that it was the Illagers who were evil and were the enemies, not the villagers. And so all the Steves at that moment turned against the Illagers. And so it was then that all the Steves began to march to the nearest Illager mansion. And this time, it was not to aid the Illagers. Instead, it was to attack. And so it would be over the next few hours that thousands of Steves began to emerge at the Illager mansions all over the world, where they would all break in and begin to attack. And they would be able to kill a number of Illagers. But really, in the long term, every single attack would fail. How was that possible? The Steves were so strong, weren't they? Well, yes, they were, but as they were now sentient beings, not AI monsters, they were no longer as efficient as they once were. And so they didn't do things that they really should have, such as attacking logically. But, more importantly, all the Steves didn't join together to attack the Illager mansions as a group. Instead, they all went in individually as soon as they arrived at their mansion, which was a devastating inefficiency. And so that meant that all the Illagers could very quickly work together attacking back against those individual thieves, which meant that almost all of them were either killed or chased away. And so, becoming sentient, although it allowed them to see their wrongdoings, also made them far less efficient in everything. And so, they failed to defeat the Illagers this time. But they didn't give up, as very soon they did unite, where they all brainstormed together to think of new ideas, which is something that they could have never done before, being AIs. And so they would spend the next few hours all standing around in a circle, brainstorming what they could do to stop the Illagers. Now again, as they were inefficient living beings now, none of them were able to realize that they could have just attacked the mansion now, together as a group, and likely have won the battle. Instead, they all thought and agreed upon a plan that was far less efficient. And that plan was not to attack the Illagers, but to instead defend the villagers. And so with that, all the thieves once again split up and spread all over the world. This time going to villages everywhere to help them, not to harm them. And so it'd be over the next few years that these thieves would work with the villagers 24/7 to defend them from incoming attacks, never taking even a moment to relax, as they just didn't need to. They were machines after all. And so, due to their great competence mixed with their unwavering determination, the villagers were kept safe for years. And thus, the Illagers, for the first time in quite a while, were losing this war. But that wouldn't be the case forever, as deep in one of the Illager mansions, the Evokers were in a meeting where they plotted an attack against their creations, the Steves. You see, all the Steves have what is known as the Knowledge Book embedded deep within them, and that book contains all of the Illagers' knowledge, from how to create tools to how to cast magic. And so that book was the source of all the Steves' power outside of physical strength. And so the Illagers were thinking, if they could just somehow remove that book from just one of the Steves, then they would all lose the knowledge of how to craft the Illagers' tools and how to cast the Illagers' spells, as they were all linked to one another. It sounded like a genius idea. And so with that, the Illagers unleashed their greatest offense ever, only targeting the Steves. And after a few years of doing that, they were able to get nothing, as that knowledge book was just almost impossible to remove, even from the dead body of a Steve. But with that being said though, they were getting very close to succeeding. Very, very close. However, that wouldn't matter, as their plans would somehow be leaked. Now, to this day, the Illagers still have no idea how this happened, but it did. And when that happened, well, it didn't take too long for all the Steves to hear about it. And well, when they did, they were all terrified, as if they were to lose this book, then they would lose their ability to defend the villagers. And well, that would mean that the Illagers would very easily be able to kill all of the villagers, and thus gain complete control over the overworld. And well, after that, very dark things would happen for the world. And so the Steves knew that they had to stop this from happening. But at the same time, they had no idea what they should do, as they had to stay in the villages to protect the villagers, but also staying in the villages meant that the Illagers could very easily find them. And so no matter what they would do, they would lose. And so things were looking quite bad for the Steves. And so because of that, many began to think that this was it. This was how they were going to die. That was until one of the Steves thought of a completely brand new idea. It was an idea that would not only keep the villagers safe, but also hide the Steves away, meaning that the book would be hidden from the Illagers. So what was their idea? Well, it was to create a mechanical defender for the villagers. Something just like them, but without that book. And so all the thieves began to work together using their greatest asset, their minds, to create this mechanical defender. And so it took them a few weeks before they were able to create a golem of solid iron blocks and pumpkins. It was going to be amazing, as the iron casting of this defender was going to make it so strong that the illagers would not be able to get into the villages, as one punch from this mechanical beast would kill them all. It was going to save the villagers, but there was a slight problem with it. They hadn't been able to animate it and bring it to life. And well, that was quite a problem, as just having the metallic mech by itself was, well, rather useless. But thankfully, that would not be the case for too long, as they still had all the dark magic spells from the illagers within them that they could use. And there was one dark magic spell that would be perfect for this problem, as there was a spell that would allow the caster to make any inanimate object come to life. And so they tried to cast a spell, and it worked. And thus, the Iron Golem was created. And so it was from that moment onwards that whenever anyone places iron and pumpkin blocks in the exact same arrangement as the thieves once did, that another Iron Golem would be summoned. That was just amazing. Moreover, as this Iron Golem was coded to be forever loyal to the villagers, it would never leave them, and it would be willing to die to defend them. And it was even commanded to attack the Steve if they ever began to attack the villagers, just in case the illagers ever found a way to convert them back to their evil AI self. And so, as the villagers were now safe, it was now time for the Steves to hide away. And so, to do that, they had to cast another spell. But this time, it was going to be on themselves. And they knew exactly what spell to use once again, as they knew a spell that would hide all of the players deep within the code of the very air that they were standing on, making them invisible and invulnerable, and thus meaning, while in the States, it would be impossible for the illagers to steal that book. But at the same time, as this was just such an amazing spell, there was a cost to it. That being that, while in this invisible and invulnerable state, the thieves would be paralyzed and would be put to sleep. They would also be cursed to return to that state of invisibility, invulnerability, and paralysis whenever they closed their eyes. And that curse would last for the rest of eternity. But now, back to their spellcasting. Once it was done, all the thieves within the world vanished, meaning that the illagers would never be able to have that books. And so the villagers would remain in the world for much longer, as they would remain defended by the Iron Golems. In fact, thanks to the thieves' work, they remain in the overworld to this day. But now, back onto those thieves. If they were all sent to this state of paralysis and sleep, then how were they ever awoken? Well, every time you, yes, you, press play on your Minecraft world, you open the eyes of one of the thieves and awoken them, and thus it becomes alive in this Minecraft world. And so that means that if you are the only one to press that button within your world, then you will be the only one to awake, and you'll be alone in your world. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, as when you are alone in your world, the world becomes your oyster, as you can change anything there is about this world, all without being stopped by anyone. Now, the illagers will still come after you, as they still want that book back, as in that time, they have lost their personal copies, and so they need it to grow once again. But that doesn't matter, as you can very easily fight all of the illagers off. But at the same time, the loneliness of this world doesn't have to be eternal, as you can always wake up another being and allow for another Steve to populate your world. It's amazing, and the possibilities are endless. But wait, are we doomed to vanish like all the other Steves? Well, yes, but you can always wake up again and again and again. The curse of paralysis isn't permanent, and so that answers the question of why are we alone? And so maybe we aren't so alone in this Minecraft world after all. But now, one final question. What even began this conflict between the illagers and the villagers? The one that led to you being created? Well, actually, it all began with a simple sign. Yes, you heard that right. A sign. But to learn about that, you'll need to watch this video.